What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Historic Labs channel. This is Journey to Launch Part 3. We're going to go over ingredients and manufacturing. Let's get started. When it comes to ingredients, you could always get super creative, right? You can make any type of formula, any type of combination within reason, but it also depends on your goal, right? And what you want your customer to actually feel, and the experience that you want your customer to have. So when I was starting off, right, making Historic Labs, the best way to start off, to be honest, is just go on Google. Just look up pre-workout supplements. Obviously, you're going to get all the sponsored stuff, which these are all paid ads by Google. And then you could scroll down, take a look at some stuff, right? Like GNC has their own. You got obviously Bucked Up, Ghost, Rise, some of the big companies, Gorilla Mode that, made huge headway probably like 4 years ago, like during COVID. Caged, which Cage does really well like worldwide. I don't really see a lot of people using Cage in the US, but I might be wrong. I mean, I've seen them at Vitamin Shop and other places. And then you got like cheaper pre-workouts that don't really have a lot of ingredients in them. But it just depends what you want to do, to be honest. Like, what experience do you want your customer to have when you are formulating and you are going to go live with your products and stuff? Here at Historic Labs, we pretty much use what we call the 5 pillars, right? So, for example, you have these 5 pillars that we use for all of our formulations, all types of products that we have. So we focus on performance, endurance, energy, focus, and pump. We want our consumers to be able to have all of these things when they're consuming our product. So for example, this is the daily driver, right? This is kind of a go-to product, everyday use, has really good patent ingredients, right? We have RhodioPrime, HydroPrime, Estrogen, Synactive, BetaPure, GeniusPure. And I'll go over all of these ingredients in more detail once we come out with some videos specifically talking about certain formulas, right? Like the high stem right here. I'll go over everything. That's for a later day though. But with this formula, the idea behind it was to give the consumer a good experience using those 5 pillars, right? You have citrulline, betaine anhydrous, lion's mane, GeniusPure caffeine, right? Staple, estrogen for healthy gut, Synactive. It's a really interesting ingredient, and you'll learn more about it later on. But not only do you want to focus on your customer experience, but you also have to think about the market too, right? Like for me, as a prior college athlete, prior military service member, United States Marine Corps, there are things that those people, right, first responders, cannot take, right? So that's why you have to do your due diligence in looking at ingredients that are approved or prohibited by some of these organizations. A quick and easy one would be like WADA, right? So you could take a look at their prohibited list. They have a lot of things on here, but you can just click the copy here and it's going to bring you up to this, for example, right? It's a really lengthy document, but if you take a look at some ingredients when you're doing your research and you're formulating, you could literally just Control F and find them here, right? So like DMAA, right? That's banned through WADA, right? So a lot of your natural athletes or some of the service members, first responders, some people that work at hospitals, that might not be an ingredient that they can take. It's a stimulant, right? And there's also one ingredient that I've seen in a couple pre-workout products is they hide it as bitter orange, right? But it's Synephrine, and it's banned by the NCAA. So all my college athletes, if you look at your supplement fact list, make sure that you don't see any of this because it is banned by the NCAA. And then there's some other ways that you can find, some banned substances for like the military, right? Like Military Times, a company that Military Times, a journalist company here. So 12 workout supplements named in FDA warnings. So they give a couple examples, right? So look, DMAA is on there again. And then they consider like high risk supplement list. And there's a couple companies that receive warning letters by the FDA regarding containing DMAA, right? So, some popular brands on here. I know Blackstone Labs, Core Nutritionals. That's a new one. I didn't know that they had a ban or a warning letter from the FDA about that. But you obviously just have to be mindful of what you're formulating, what market you're trying to target. Are you trying to target the overall market? Are you trying to stay niche, right? Like for us, I want some of the college athletes and military service members and first responders to take our products, so that's why I kept it clean, away from all these prohibited and banned substances. But when it comes to ingredients, right, you have, generic and or patent ingredients. The analogy I like to use is like for Tylenol versus over-the-counter acetaminophen. That. So Tylenol is that. It's just a patent version of that main active ingredient, right? A lot of patent ingredients just have a lot of money behind and research behind that ingredient, and some of them even have clinical trials, right? Like Tylenol efficacy. So they have some trials behind it going up against like ibuprofen and a couple other things. Like here's their study design, right? So that can be very important when you're doing research on ingredients that are patent versus non-patent. Not only that, but dosing is important. So dosing is important because you're going to make a label claim, right? When you make the supplement label that goes on your product. So you have to make sure that your supplement dosing is actually, you want to make sure that you're clinically dosing your product properly. And I think that's just better because you're transparent. You did your research, right? So for example, like citrulline dosing, 3 to 6 grams per day, right? And then you could look up a lot of the clinical data on it that's been done on citrulline. For us, like we have citrulline malate, right? 2 to 1 is what we have in our products. And then, so we do 6,000, right? So even just like a little example here. So citrulline malate about an hour before exercise. So that's what we dose our citrulline malate at. And not only is dosing important, one thing you have to keep in mind is when it comes to your certificate of analysis, right? So, or AKA COA. Manufacturing companies that you work with, and companies that you use their patent ingredients, they'll usually send you a certificate of analysis. Here's a good example here. I just Googled so you guys can take a look. So this one's a sample by Nordic Naturals. So it talks about the potency, purity, sustainability, and a couple other things like metals, right? So like here, like if there's lead in the actual product, right? So less than 0.0000 ppm, which is parts per million. So you want to make sure that when you receive your product, you get the COA, you understand the purity, making sure there's no heavy metals or fillers or other things in there. You can also do, a separate third-party testing. There's companies that do third-party testing. So like right here, Informed Sports does third-party testing. Informed Sports is actually kind of cool. They go test or like certify the facility as like Informed Sports, right? So they not only do they certify the facility that you go with, right? The manufacturing facility that you go with, they also certify your product. So Informed Sports is actually kind of cool. And so once you do your due diligence, right, off looking at ingredients, making so once you do your due diligence and you kind of have like a baseline of ingredients that you want. Some patent, some not, right? Generic versus patent. It all depends on cost too, because a lot of these things can get costly very quickly, especially with testing too. Like for example, even some patent ingredients can have you stand out, right, in the market. Like us, we use a product called GeniusPure. So GeniusPure is probably one of the, I mean, they make a claim here, one of those powerful alpha GPCs, which I would agree it is. Their alpha GPC is at 90% yielding, right? So they have a 70% and 90%. We use the 90% in our products. All of our pre-workouts have this. Compared to other alpha GPCs, they use alpha GPC 50%. So with GeniusPure, right, it increases cognitive performance in healthy populations, shows changes with one dose. This is what really led me to looking into GeniusPure. And our products are probably maybe like the first or second company in the US to use GeniusPure, and then like third in the world. So it was really nice to come out with GeniusPure in all of our products. It made us stand out, right? And then there's a couple other benefits of here about GeniusPure. Here they make a claim 108% increase in focus from just one dose, which is really nice. 70% and 90% potency, and then also the storage conditions, right? So let's say you forget your bottle in your car and it's springtime and you're in California. Let's say it's like 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So their alpha GPC doesn't clump in that temperature. Here they're showing a storage condition of 30 Celsius, which is like 80, 84 degrees Fahrenheit. And it didn't clump, which is really good. Just because with more moisture, it clumps faster with that ingredient. So that's something to keep in mind when you're doing research as well. What ingredients you're putting into your bottles, right? So for example, the non-sim here, the pump formula, has more ingredients that have potential to clump, right? So we use HydroPrime, which is a glycerol powder, and we use alpha GPC at 90% yielding. I upped the dose of HydroPrime in the pump versus obviously our thermogenic, our high stem, and then our daily driver like I showed earlier. So this product has more ingredients that potentially can clump at higher temperatures. So you just got to keep that in mind. The amount of ingredients also matters, right? Because when you have the amount of ingredients also matter, because when you have 5 ingredients versus 15 ingredients of these different synergistic effects that happen, it's also going to play into the experience that you give your customer. And the more ingredients you put into your formulation, the bigger the bottle, right? Or depending on the number of servings. So that leads us into talking about manufacturing. Now let's move on to manufacturing. Here on the screen I have NutriCaps, which is a manufacturing company that we used for our first couple products. You want to make sure that you pick someone that's trustworthy. So when I was starting off doing a lot of this research, right, looking for companies to manufacture our products with, NutriCaps is all right. I think it's a good first starter because it taught me a lot about the industry, right? They do everything in-house, which is pretty cool. They have low MOQs, right? Minimum order quantities. And they also do the labeling too. So they have the artist, the graphic designer for it and everything. Luckily, my fiance is a graphic designer. She was able to design the label and do all that stuff and speak their language, so we can give them everything. And we didn't have to pay that much for the design. But when you're looking for your facility, right, make sure to reach out to multiple facilities and get quoted, because some are going to quote you lower, some are going to quote you higher. And you also want to make sure to ask the questions of, What specific testing do you guys do? Are there any hidden fees? Is there something that we need to be worried about? Shipping costs, right? Depending on the state where you make your products from. Shipping costs, depending on the state where you get your products from, right? NutriCaps is in Georgia. I was in California. So you have to be mindful that there's going to be difference in payment, right? Our current manufacturer is out of Texas. That's much cheaper to come from Texas than it is from Georgia. So if you scroll through here, right, NutriCaps, always look for this. GMP certified, right? They're certified in a couple other entities, like in other countries. BBB is pretty good, right? Make sure that they're an accredited business and they have good practices. And then also make sure that they're FDA regulated, right? So some manufacturing facilities, they have that like current FDA regulation certification, right? So our current manufacturer has all that stuff, so we trust them. Ask about lead times and production times, sampling, right? Some might give you, 3 samples before they want to go to production. Some people keep sampling until, you get the flavor right, or you make certain changes. You didn't like, that some products had this much agmatine sulfate or this much caffeine. We want to try something stronger. We want to try something weaker. We want, this flavor made the product too sweet, too bitter. Like our first product ever was our Mount Olympus product, right? It was blue raspberry lemonade. We went back and forth a couple times just because, it was too sweet or not enough lemonade. It just didn't mesh well. There was a point where we took some ingredients out, added some, right? Our first patent ingredient that we used in that formula was glycerpump, a glycerol powder. Glycerpump comes from Australia. So that was a really good ingredient, especially to get, hyperhydrate the cells and get that nasty pump. Some people call it the wet pump. So I got quoted maybe by like 4 or 5 different companies, but the reason why I went with NutriCaps was because it was pretty simple, right? So formulation's pretty simple. They have hundreds of ingredients and flavoring actually. So here's, commonly used ingredients. You can literally just look through everything and they have it all, right? They have a lot of over-the-counter stuff, or not over-the-counter, sorry. They have a lot of generic stuff, right? Even like testosterone boosters that, people get at GNC or Vitamin Shop. Here's their stock flavors. So you can mix and match different things. If you want something custom outside of this, they obviously have to order it in quantity. So you might have to pay some of that. And then here's some of their trademarked ingredients that they use. So there's glycerpump, right? We were able to use that. They didn't have a lot of other ingredients that were patented. That's one thing that I learned when we launched like all of our historic lineup, was that they just didn't have the ingredients that I wanted. So they were going to charge an arm and a leg to be able to bring in, some of the ingredients that I really wanted to use for the new formulations. But they have it all here. I mean, our MOQ was 288, right? You can't beat that, to be honest. I didn't have the capital starting off, so I didn't have like, 50, 60 grand to be able to get like 1,000 bottles made. So this was really easy for us, and I think I ended up doing about 500 or 288 times 2, right? 2 flavors, and then after that we purchased another 288 of a third flavor. So we had 3 flavors for our Mount Olympus pre-workout, and then we ended up switching to just launching the historic lineup altogether. So we have 1 flavor per product, hopefully getting a couple more flavors this year and expanding our portfolio. But here are some examples of, packaging. So here's for the vitamins and stuff and pills, and then you have the powder bottles, right? So you have a 20 ounce, 25 ounce. We did the 25 ounce with our first product, and I just didn't like the look of the 44 ounce product, to be honest. And then you get super big once you go into obviously like protein. But I just wasn't a fan of the short, fat bottles. So this one right here, though, the historic lineup has a 30-ounce bottle. So just a little bit taller than this one, right? But it still has that sleek look. Watch, I'll show you guys. So here's the 25-ounce bottle, right? Mount Olympus is our first formula. And then we went to our reformulation of the historic lineup. You can see it's just a little bit taller, right? And that added height gave us the opportunity to put a little bit more powder and have that breathing room when you open the bottle. With the small 25-ounce, right? We had 25 servings, and each scoop was 16.8 grams. When you open the bottle, you're going to have the scoop, right? But this was so packed that the scoop was like right here. And whenever people were getting their servings, they had to bury the scooper back in. So with the 30-ounce bottle, it gives you a little bit more room, right? So the powder's not like coming out of the bottle as soon as you open it and you break the seal, right? And your scoop isn't lost forever. So you learn these things as you go along, right? I didn't know any of these things when I first started off, but I learned it over time, right? Through making these mistakes. And also sometimes your manufacturer isn't even going to tell you these things. They're just going to make your formula, take your money, and send you the product. That's it. Thank God for our new manufacturer, Master Blends. Our boy Kagan over there, he actually would walk me through things. He would let me know. He'd be like, hey, this bottle's too short. If we do 30 servings, you cannot do it in this bottle with this amount of formulas. With this amount of ingredients, you cannot. We'd have to eliminate an ingredient. So then I'd have the conversation with him. Okay, cool. If we lessen the servings, right? If we do 25, can we make this happen? I still wanted to stay within our parameters of the 5 pillars, right? I didn't want to eliminate a lot of things and take that away from the consumer. So we had to make some adjustments. And we had to make some sacrifices, right? So I pretty much sacrificed a 30 serving container for 25 just so I can keep all those good ingredients in there in our new bottles. They also have single serving packets here for NutriCap. We did like 5,000 just obviously so we could hand out to people. And then different color bottles. They have some new stuff here. I don't remember this at all. Your lids, lid colors, capsule sizes, capsule colors, etc. Overall, when it comes to just doing research about ingredients and understanding the markets, right? I think a good place to start would just be here, right? Just Google pre-workouts, look at the ingredients, right? Let's just check Gorilla Mode for now. Let's take a look at their stuff. So let's start with Gorilla Mode. Let's take a look at their sub facts, right? So they got a couple vitamins in here, sodium, potassium, it's all good. There's citrulline, right, for 2 scoops. So we're looking at the 2 scoops because that's obviously like the top quality dosing here. So you see they have creatine in there, tyrosine, betaine anhydrous, HydroPrime, that's 1 pound ingredient, malic acid. They separated the malic and the citrulline. Usually when you combine them, it's citrulline malate, but it's all mixed inside of like a container and then just put into the bottles. Alpha GPC at 800 milligrams, right? So that's clinically dosed, right? The study shows 600 milligrams for alpha GPC, 50%, but hey, we got them beat. We're at 90% alpha GPC. And then they have 400 milligrams caffeine and huperzine A. Here's a good place to start, right? Where you do the research and you're like, okay, cool. This is 20 grams scoop here, servings per container, 40. That's only for 1 scoop though. If you do 2 scoops, you only get 20. So that's how they try to get you too. If you guys look at like serving sizes, always look at, if they have this 1 scoop, 2 scoop thing, just look at the 2 scoops and then see the servings in container, which means they only have 20 servings in this full bottle. And they use that 44-ounce bottle. It looks just massive, takes up too much space in your cabinets and in your backpack and everything. But overall, they have a good brand. I mean, they have top tier products, to be honest. Formulation wise is insane. They do a really good job. When you come over to our side, you can see we have, you know, kind of a daily, historic high stem, and a thermogenic and a non-stem and a pump formula. See, so if you look at ours, we use 6 pan ingredients in our high stem formula, right? And it's stacked. So obviously our beta-alanine is good, 3,200 milligrams, HydroPrime 2,000, Lion's Mane 600 is good. Our GeniusPure, this is our hard hitter right here. RhodioPrime, that's something that a lot of people don't use in pre-workout, to be honest. They use it as standalone, but it's actually a really good ingredient that helps with mood regulation and serotonin receptors. So Zoom XR, extended release caffeine and estrogen for your gut. But our most stacked pre-workout with the most pan ingredients is going to be our thermogenic. So we have really good ingredients here. Calorie burn, mitoburn, just did a video on that. You can go check it out on our Instagram. I talk about the synergistic combo between those. And as you can see, our new manufacturing facility, right? Current GMP. So if they don't have the C is important because that's current GMP manufacturing practices, right? FDA registered facility, master blends, works with representatives from the FDA to make sure, you know, they're within regulations, veteran owned, manufactured in the US. Well, that sums it up for this video. Check out the description below to stay connected. Use code HISTORY for 10% off. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more historic content.